Aishah Calling. By Frank Fasano. The Coldest Shadow is the one inside of us all. A new novel set in the City of Darkbend. Introduction. Aishah Calling is a dark and twisted tale set in the City of Darkbend, occurring a year before the unfortunate events that are related in A Penny Saved and about 2 years after Dark Alleys was chronicled. Falco is caught in a downward spiral of excess and self-destruction from which his very soul is in peril. Consumed with longing and loss, he's out of a job, out of hope, and out of his usual charm and luck. At his lowest point, who should walk back into his life on a pair of designer heels, needing his help? That strange force love turns kings into fools and hobos into heroes. I do not know if the City of Darkbend is really a setting in these stories. This city seems to take deep raspy breaths of the cold night air, looking out over its own landscape with the heterochromic eyes of a true predator. One a bright gold that seems lit from within. The other the deepest blue that you could ever envision, so dark that the slightest shadow makes it go black. There is a heart to this place, a heart that beats with the lives, dreams, hopes, pain and passion of millions. She has a mouth, this place breathes in all of these things. It breathes them in, taking its due, giving back only what it has no use for. I am certain that this city has a mouth for another reason. Because it has teeth. All cities have teeth, you may think. This may be truth, all cities may have teeth, but this one has fangs. So, take my city as you will. However, never take it lightly, for this she will not suffer fools. If you are willing to step up to see what you can get out of her, do so. Just understand well that there is no trick that you know that is new here. No game that has not played out on these streets more times than I would care to count. No story that has not been told in the numerous bars here from before you were born. I would even dare to say no game that has not been played out in the dark alleys a million times. Especially the ones that involve life and death. So, if you are a tourist, enjoy my city, enjoy all the sights. See a show, have a great meal, whatever your heart's desire, be it virtue or vice, you can sate it. But if I was a tourist, I would not linger long on the nighttime streets. Don't stand too near the darkness. If you grow too curious about what is in the shadows may become curious about you. That would be bad. That would be very bad. Chapter 1. A Rude Awakening. Sounds that were both familiar yet still strange began to part the curtain of sleep. The floorboards in the tiny kitchenette in the rear of the small office made sounds of protest. The smell of coffee began to permeate the confined space of the closet-sized kitchenette. It drifted on across the somber industrial carpet, the color of Merlot spilled on linen, then left to stain. Finally reaching some part of his brain, causing the automated reaction of vaguely forgotten synapses fallow since the previous morning. His day had begun. The wheels of his tired existence began to revolve once more. Stimulants for the morning, then dependent at night in a rigid regimen involving a complex analysis on celestial bodies. Coffee in copious amounts until while the sun is rising, and then after it passes the apex of its journey. Then give or take an hour start with the well-established course of depressants taken orally as needed. This was the well-established practice that was rehearsed to the point of ritual by now with all the reverence of a Natale novena. After 2 years, this pattern repeated at more or less autonomic response to a prearranged set of external stimuli. I silently pledged my undying devotion to the angelic operator of the omnipotent Hamilton Beach Flex Brew coffee maker. Now the infernal question that always intrudes on these moments of near reverence. What was her name? Mental faculties returned at an astoundingly slow rate. Thoughts that allegedly travel at speeds approaching that of light were either dragging their proverbial feet, got lost on the way to their intended destinations, or just stopped along the way to admire the scenery. Regardless of the reason, the various part of the respective anatomy were slow to check in. Pronounces creaking of the decrepit floor to the left of them, the closet door closing to the right managed to force one very heavy eyelid to open. The focus was not even close to clear, it was as if 8 blurry figures loomed before him. Closing both eyes hard, then an added level of concentration was attempted. After a moment of shaking the head, he attempted reopening the eyes again. He counted 8 very blurry figures seemed to clarify into 6 slightly less blurry figures. A vigorous moment of gently rubbing the eyes seemed to add some clarity to the vague gray blurry, seemingly reducing their numbers from 6 to 4. The 4 shadowy forms seemed to be gesturing some very confusing body language. Finally, the number of gray humanoid shapes became a slightly clearer 2. The 2 forms loomed with over him like 2 gigantic monoliths. All further attempt to reduce the 2 forms by half failed. The only change to them was the level of resolution. The 2 hulking masses that stood before him could have been massively oversized bookends. Their expressions were patiently polite. The bookend on the left extended a steaming cup of coffee towards the man shape that was starting to sit up on the Murphy bed. The semi-reposed figure took the cup being proffered to him, imbibing the sacred elixir greedily with his eyes closed. With the black mug to his lips, he drank hard. He drank deep until the cup was drained. Only then did he open his eyes again, really seeing the 2 men who were in his office/boudoir. Handing the black mug back to the one man, he regarded the other looming figure. The other man was holding 2 ensembles that he must have assembled before he awoke. The still half-sleeping man knew the garments well. They came from his closet. The 2 men standing before him he knew mostly by reputation. The man who was presenting the garments arranged just like a valet would, with half the jacket covering the shirt, with the tie coming from over the left shoulder of the jacket crossing the shirt rakishly. There was a shark gray single-breasted suit with a bark blue shirt and a slightly lighter blue silk skinny tie. The other offered ensemble being his double-breasted black suit with traditional white shirt accented by his double thick dark gray tie. The smiling hulk that was displaying the choice of garments was obviously showing a preference for the gray suit. The man in the bed looked back and forth between the 2 men and cleared his throat in an attempt to learn the art of speech once again. "So, what is the occasion?" The impeccably dressed side of beef playing the role of valet smile grew even brighter as he opened his mouth to speak. Before he could, the man in bed interrupted him. "And who are you and what are you doing in my office?" The other bookend was about to speak when the covers were thrown up into the air. The man in bed suddenly seemed to almost leap and twist, swinging his legs off the bed and slamming his feet onto the floor. The bookends were unaffected by this display of speed and agility. He made eye contact from one to the other and back again. One of the men spoke and saying matter-of-factly, "I'm Mr. Barron and this is Mr. Duke." Barron and Duke, they were the preeminent professional of Darkbend. If you needed something done in the city of Darkbend and you needed it done to your exacting specifications, were the men for you. Men. Oh yeah, right, we will go with that for a description. Mr. Barron and Mr. Duke were who you went to if your problems were the type that go bump in the night and you had the coin to do it. They didn't come cheap, and together Barron and Duke made BAD Incorporated, or the old firm as they were sometimes called. BAD Incorporated was standing in front of his Murphy bed, and the man sitting there did not react to this information. By their descriptions, the man sitting on the bed would have been willing to guess that it was Mr. Duke holding the coffee cup and Mr. Barron playing valet. So, it was Mr. Duke who just spoke, so he swings his gaze to the man he believed to be Mr. Barron. The warm smile on Mr. Barron's face went up in wattage and he said, "Mr. Falco, Aishah would like to see you." She would she was all I could manage as far as witty repartee. The man stood up and mustered all the machismo he could, wearing just a pair of black briefs. Standing almost chest to chest with them, he said, "And what if I tell you both to go jump in the Raritan?" They said if you want us to leave, our orders are very specific. The one he thought of as Mr. Barron still holding the sweets. "What exactly are your orders, gentlemen?" Still standing just inches from them. Mr. Duke said, "We are merely to invite you to breakfast with the doctor, and if you needed a ride we would be happy to provide one for you." Still nearly naked, he cleared his throat. "You broke into my office to just do that." Mr. Duke objected, saying we in no way broke it or forced entry in any way. "We just arrived as your companion was leaving. We asked her if you were in and she let us enter as she was departing. We just assessed your current state and thought it would be prudent to make some coffee and help you choose some appropriate garment if you decided that you were so inclined." Mr. Barron seemed to be almost biting his tongue, and it was clear that he preferred the direct approach. The nearly naked man asked him, "Do you want to hurt me?" Mr. Barron smirked, saying, "Are you asking because you are scared?" Mr. Duke just rolled his eyes. The other man smirked back at him, looked him dead in the eyes and said, "Nope. Just planning my morning." Still staring Mr. Barron in the eyes, he said, "Now get out." He was not expecting an argument, if not a fight. But both men merely gave a nod of their heads, took one step back in unison, and headed to the door. It never pays to appear meek in Darkbend. Rules of the jungle: if something scares you, pick up the biggest stick you can find and run at it, yelling, screaming and swinging that frickin' stick as hard as you can and aiming for the head. You don't win that fight by getting in the first hit. You win that battle by getting in the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and so on until your arms feel like putty and your heart is pumping pure battery acid through your veins. The two men reached the door and didn't even look back. But as the door started to close, the other man called out to them, "Gentlemen, please wait in the hall, I shouldn't be too long." Mr. Duke looked back over his shoulder, nodded his head and smiled. The door closed, and Falco picked up his mug and drank the rest of it. It was still too hot and burned all the way down his throat. He turned on the radio and went into the bathroom and threw up into the commode, stripped off his skivvies and stood in the narrow shower as the cold water came dribbling out of the shower head. Managing not to scream, he lathered up and just managed to get a nice coat of lather all over just as the pipes rattled and the trickle of water stopped. Shit was all he could say. With his eyes stinging with soap, he banged and hit the performing numerous percussive maintenance was fruitless. The sink seemed to have little water pressure. So he used the chipped and battered DBPD mug to wash out most of the shampoo out of his hair. Soon the slowed to a trickle and he was dumbfounded only for a moment. He looked at the old-fashioned commode suspiciously. It was the kind that had a tank about 4 feet over the actual bowl. He reached up and was able to dip the mug into the tank, scurry over to the shower. After a few trips back and forth, he had managed to wash off most of the suds, but not all. The water levels in the tank had dropped, so now he was balancing vicariously on the bowl to reach the water. 3 more trips and there was nearly done. If it wasn't for the unfortunate incident with the kiwi, he would have been ready 10 minutes earlier and without the small laceration to his scalp. As Falco departed his office, he found the old firm standing against the wall to both sides of his door. And Mr. Barron smiled, probably at his choice of ensembles. He nodded approvingly and even tried to straighten Falco's collar, but was stopped with simultaneous looks from Falco and Mr. Duke.